Today I'll be talking about how we can fail better in the water, sanitation and hygiene sector. I'm based in Durban in South Africa, and if you want to put anything on Twitter over the course of this presentation, then you can find me at Bex Sindall, and you can find the little group of us who have been working on this at FSM_fail. And the other two women involved in this collaboration are Esther Shaler, who is based at UNICEF in Denmark, and Danny Barrington, who is a lecturer at the University of Western Australia. And as Maxine said, we tend to refer to this project as Shit Happens. So we know that failure, generally speaking, is often glamorized in societies, and it's often talked about as the mother of all invention. Sometimes we use it for inspiration. People fail and fail and fail, but they keep trying, and eventually they persevere. And honestly, sometimes it's just funny when things go wrong. And this is collectively our top toilet moment of any film, any movie in the last 10, 20 years. The problem is that we're all happy to discuss failures at the pub, and we'll quite happily sit around at the end of a conference talking about the things that went wrong with various projects, but we're not willing to share that information openly elsewhere. And we know that that's a problem because when projects fail, we know that they waste money. But they can also negatively impact people's lives. And so every now and then you will come across that one line buried in a research paper that shows how sanitation programs that were designed to protect people have actually resulted in harm. And those are the things that we don't really talk about very much. And there's lots of people who have tried to create platforms to get us to share and to talk about things like failure, and quite often they failed to achieve that. This is the results of a survey the Susanna Sustainable Sanitation Alliance carried out, not specifically about failure, but about why people do or don't use these online platforms. And it's really interesting that these are pretty much the same reasons that we hear when we're talking to people about why they don't talk about failure at a conference. And a lot of people feel like they don't have the time. It's just another thing that they need to do on top of their already busy lives. But the majority of respondents are concerned about privacy. They're concerned about what they can say without getting in trouble with their organization. They're worried about what they can say and still keep their job or still keep their funder happy. And that means the sharing that does happen is piecemeal. It's not systematic. And so we've been thinking about how we can try and make sharing more systematic. And the first thing that we thought of was, well, we want to make it fun. How do we make people enjoy talking about failure? And we decided that the best way to start was to come up with a series of game shows. And so we ran
I don't think we can hear the sound.
Yeah. So the Blunders, Bloopers and Foul-ups game show has been presented now at a number of international conferences, and it's a elaborate way to get people to talk about failures. So we have two teams of three, and we do things like get them to guess which of the failures that we discuss are fake failures, ones that we've made up as opposed to ones that are real and have happened within projects. And any game show that you can think of, at some point we've probably ripped it off. And so we're going to go through one of those example questions with you now, to show you the kind of things that we do. So in the picture round, the goal is to work out what failure these 4 pictures describe. So we have a rather swirly looking weather map, a stack of folders, a ticking clock, and some sandcastle buckets. So I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to have a think about what those failures might describe. And normally we would get people to, on the teams, to come up with an answer to these kind of questions and then share it. And for correct answers, there are obviously points. And for incorrect answers, there's the opportunity to look a little bit silly in front of your colleagues. So I'm not going to make any of you give your answers, but I will give you the answer to this one, so that you can see how close you got. So this is a failure that happened in Vanuatu during Cyclone Pam in 2015. And when the cyclone hit, there was a huge amount of disruption to water and sanitation systems. And they needed to supply jerry cans, water containers people could use to go and collect water and bring that water back to their homes. Now, UNICEF and the UN agencies have a very detailed specification of what a water container must look like, and the function that it must perform in order for it to be up to their standard. And they discovered that there was a paint manufacturer in Fiji who would be able to supply some paint tins with a minor modification very quickly as basically buckets. But because these didn't meet the exacting specifications that the UN agencies had for water buckets, they weren't deemed to be good enough, and so they instead had to wait for a shipment to arrive from much further afield. In the meantime, of course, people still needed access to water, and so they were trying to get hold of any way that they could to transport water, which happens to be the plastic buckets that were normally sold to beach tourists. So the kinds of plastic buckets that you see in the bottom right-hand corner were being used as people's primary water delivery mechanism until other better buckets were procured. So you can see how that's quite a significant failure for the people who are stuck carrying around sandcastle buckets. So this series of game shows is very much about trying to make sure that things are fun. We're trying to get people talking. And so we find that prizes help. We find that the little Shit Happens logo that we had on that very first screen, we give out badges with that on, and again, it's a talking point. It's a way to get people saying, where did that come from? What's that badge? How do I get one? But as I said, this is all an elaborate icebreaker. What we really want to know is, we want to know what goes wrong, why does it go wrong, and how do we get people to talk about that more? And the first one of these that we did was at a conference in a town called Nakuru in Kenya in 2018. And after that game show, the conversations that we had with the audience members resulted in the suggestion that there ought to be something written down, that something should come from this, which said that we needed to be more transparent, and we needed to be more accountable, and we needed to be better at talking about and sharing failures. And so, based on the input from participants at that session, and then continued interaction with participants after the session, the Nakura Accord was written up. And this is the 9 points of the Nakura Accord, and that was launched on World Toilet Day in 2018. And it's a set of principles that you can sign up to, and the website for signing up to that is at the bottom of the screen here, to say that I am somebody who works in the wash sector, and it's on us to hold the sector to account. And so these are the things that I will do to make sure that we improve. And currently we have over 250 individuals who have signed up to the Nakura Accord, as well as 12 organisations and 1 event. But we knew that there was a gap still. We knew that not everybody can afford to attend an international conference. Not everybody spends their evenings and weekends hanging out on Twitter, although I'm sure far more of us do now than we did 5-6 months ago. So what are we going to do to reach those people? And at the end of last year, we started a research project which is being funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering, called Amplifying Local Voices. And this is working in 4 sub-Saharan African countries, so South Africa, Tanzania, Zimbabwe and Malawi. And we are interviewing people who work on the front lines in water and sanitation. So these are local wash professionals, and we wanted to understand from them how failures happen in their line of work, why they think those failures happen, and do they talk about them? Are they things that could be discussed within their organisations? And we know that failure is a really sensitive topic. It's not something that we talk about freely. And so having local networks and local knowledge in those countries has been really important to developing the research tools that we need to answer the research questions, and also in identifying who we should be speaking to. So what are we trying to find out? So these are the research questions that we're asking. How do you field-based wash professionals perceive the failures that they see in wash? Why are they happening? What could they learn to avoid repeating them? How are failures discussed, and how are they perceived within organisations? And are there strategies in place to correct things that go wrong, and make sure that those lessons are learned? And what could we do in the wider wash sector to establish an environment that allows us to openly share and learn from failures, rather than repeating our mistakes and repeating the mistakes that other people have made? So this is all the things that we've been talking about with practitioners here in South Africa, as well as in the 3 other countries. But we recognise that we always have to tweak the questions slightly depending on how different people are willing to talk about failure or not, as the case may be. So obviously for us, one of the big challenges with that project is that partway through our data collection, COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic closed down most of sub-Saharan Africa. Most of sub-Saharan Africa locked down with relatively strict lockdowns from about the end of March. And so there's been a lot of delays and a lot of changes to the way that we're having to collect that data, in part because the people that we're talking to aren't necessarily the people who can be working from home and participating in Zoom calls, rather than having to be out on the streets digging up sewers when manholes are blocked, or going into villages to advise on hand washing and hygiene. And in some regards, the people that we want to speak to are busier now than they have been previously. So there have been delays, but we are hoping to have all of that data collected towards the end of this year. And then at the beginning of next year, we will be starting to look at how we can share that data and what we can learn from it. And so if you would like to sign the Nakura Accord. Again, the link for that is on the screen. And if you would like to continue to follow our adventures in wash failures and how we can learn better from those, then you can follow us on Twitter at FSM_fail. And you will also find on that Twitter link information about a special issue on failures that we are putting together with Environmental Health Insights for the end of the year. So if anybody has failures that they would like to talk about or failures that they would like to share, then we would love to hear from you. That's everything from me, and I hope that we can hear maybe some of your own failures, and if you've got any particular questions about failures, then I would love to try and answer them for you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We will definitely share the link to the Nakura Accord on our networks. There are not many people today. We're about 20 participants. Normally we reach 40 or even more than 100, but I think the vacation time is playing against us. But as you know, all the videos will be available on our YouTube channel, so I'm sure we're gonna have people watching this later on. It's a shame that I see the participant. We have a colleague she's from Université Laval, but she's now working east in Canada, and she has a lot of those stories. Catherine, but she just had a baby, so she's not there, and she has a good reason. I was wondering, well, first, thank you. I will put the presentation slides on the CentrEau websites later on, and we will begin now the question session. So as I said, if you have questions, you may write them in the chat box or just tell me, and I'll, if you want to ask your question aloud, and I'll give you the permissions for webcam and mic. Rebecca, I'll also invite you to first read out loud the question before answering them for those who are watching us later on. I first had a question. Are you sharing the materials for the game show somewhere on the web? Like if someone would want to organize the same game show in whatever event that in the regional
at the moment we haven't, partly because we do recycle some of the questions we use, and we don't want kind of everyone to have the answers in advance. One of the things that we found really challenging with the first couple of versions, where we were basically getting people to identify which failures were true and which were false, was that every fake failure that we came up with, we would then find out that someone had actually had that problem. And so it becomes, you start to realize how difficult it is to come up with a failure that sounds remotely plausible, but is actually nonsense, because there are so many ways that projects fail, and some of them sound so ridiculous, but then when you dig down into the stories, there's somebody who's had that happen. So yeah, for the purpose of kind of the answers, we haven't currently shared any of those questions.
Great, thank you. We have a first question. I don't know if you see the chat box.
Yes, so this one says, to put a happier twist to this presentation, as much as wash failures can be disastrous, which is definitely the case, what's the funniest wash failure story you could share with us? Oh gosh, so I'm not sure. Well, I guess it's all a little bit dependent on what your version of funny is. When I was doing my PhD, and I'm sure anybody who has worked with feces in a lab environment will have had a similar story. I left the lid on a container, quite a large container of sewage sludge. Left that in the cold room over the weekend, and came back on the Monday morning to find the container half empty and the walls of the cold room entirely decorated in sludge, which I didn't think was particularly funny, as I had to scrub the cold room down. But I guess on the plus side, I wasn't in the cold room when the methane buildup caused the container to go bang. So that would be kind of my lab story, I guess. We've certainly had some interesting challenges working with communities in South Africa, particularly when it comes to managing expectations around what people think that they can get out of a sanitation system. We had one prototype which was water recycling, so this was taking the water, cleaning it up, and using it, just hand washing water, cleaning it up, and reusing it for hand washing, and that caused some issues when people decided that now that they had a water source, they could take that water away to use in their homes. Because when you're recycling water and all of the water is suddenly taken out of your unit, that's definitely a challenge. Another of those, again, talking about kind of the social interaction with toilets. After some very careful probing about why the men in a household weren't particularly keen on using this rather shiny new toilet that they'd had installed, it turned out that the bowl was rather less deep than they might have wanted, and that when using the toilet, if they sat down on the toilet seat, they would come into contact, their genitalia would come into contact with the inside of the toilet bowl, which doesn't sound particularly pleasant, and is, again, it's one of those things that's kind of, it's funny when you think about it afterwards, but probably not at all funny at the time when it's happening